A lost cave, a shattered pot, a mystery untouched for 2,000 years. In 1947, three Bedouin boys stumbled upon a dark cavern near the Dead Sea. Inside, they found dusty clay jars. One was cracked open. Scrolls, ancient, brittle, secret, spilled out. They had no idea what they had found, but the world would soon learn. This was the greatest archaeological discovery of the 20th century. The Dead Sea Scrolls, a forgotten library, preserved in silence, containing texts that could rewrite the Bible and challenge everything we thought we knew about Jesus. What secrets were so dangerous? They were hidden away for millennia. The Dead Sea is one of the most inhospitable environments on Earth. Located more than 1,300 feet, nearly 400 meters below sea level, it holds the title of the Earth's lowest land elevation. Bordered by Jordan to the east and Israel and Palestine to the west, it sits in a geological depression known as the Jordan Rift Valley, formed by the tectonic movements of the African and Arabian plates. The area is geologically unstable, and earthquakes have rocked the region for thousands of years. Its name, the Dead Sea, is no exaggeration. The water is so salty, over 30% salinity, that virtually no life can survive in it. No fish swim here. No plants grow in or around its shores. Even bacteria struggle to thrive. This concentration of salt is nearly 10 times higher than that of the average ocean. The high salinity gives the water an unusual density, allowing people to float effortlessly on its surface, an experience both surreal and iconic. But the same salt that supports flotation also makes the water toxic. Swallow even a small amount, and dehydration, shock, or even death could follow. The landscape surrounding the Dead Sea mirrors this extreme nature. Jagged cliffs of barren rock, cracked desert floors, and crumbling salt formations dominate the view. The sun beats down relentlessly in the summer, with temperatures soaring above 40 degrees Celsius, 104 degrees Fahrenheit. Rainfall is rare, vegetation is sparse. The wind stirs up clouds of salty dust that settle over everything. Yet for all its hostility, this place is rich with history, myth, and mystery. The Dead Sea has been a silent witness to some of the oldest stories known to humanity. It is referenced in the Bible numerous times. According to Genesis, the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah, destroyed by divine wrath, once stood near its southern edge. The salt pillar that is said to be Lot's wife, turned to stone for looking back at the destruction, is traditionally associated with a formation nearby. Just north lies Jericho, one of the oldest continuously inhabited cities on Earth, and nearby, the Jordan River flows into the northern tip of the Dead Sea. This is the river in which Jesus was baptized by John the Baptist, an event central to Christian theology. Despite, or perhaps because of, its harshness, the area has attracted a wide array of peoples over millennia. From Bronze Age nomads and Iron Age city-states to Roman-era zealots and medieval pilgrims, the region has been a crossroads of spirituality, trade, and exile. In antiquity, salt was worth more than gold. Known as white gold, it was essential not just for flavor, but for preserving food and sustaining armies. Salt collected from the Dead Sea was transported across the ancient world. Traders would risk their lives along treacherous routes, passing through barren wilderness to extract and sell the precious crystals. Roman legions, Greek merchants, and Hebrew priests all depended on salt to maintain power and piety. Moreover, the unique composition of the Dead Sea's minerals, rich in magnesium, potassium, bromide, and bitumen, had medical and cosmetic uses. Cleopatra herself is said to have ordered cosmetics and salts from the region, and King Herod built one of the world's first health spas along its western shore. Roman aristocrats traveled here to soothe ailments and rejuvenate in its therapeutic mud and waters. But the sea is dying. In the last century, the water level has dropped by more than 100 feet. Water that once lapped against the shores of Qumran now lies miles away. The primary cause? Human diversion of the Jordan River for agricultural and municipal use. Along with mineral extraction industries along the southern basin, the result is a rapidly shrinking sea and an environmental crisis. Sinkholes, sometimes hundreds of feet deep, open up without warning along the exposed shorelines, swallowing roads, buildings, and even entire palm groves. This shifting, unstable land conceals as much as it reveals. Beneath its parched crust lie secrets, scrolls buried in caves, artifacts sealed in time. Messages from a forgotten sect. The Dead Sea, in all its silence and desolation, has guarded them for over 2,000 years. And that's what makes this place so extraordinary. It's not just a natural wonder or an archaeological backdrop. It's a paradox, a Dead Sea that gave life to one of the most significant spiritual and historical discoveries of the modern age. A barren wasteland that once nurtured prophets. A drying salt lake that preserved ancient writings better than any museum. A lifeless body of water that may still hide the keys to unlocking ancient truths. Before the scrolls were found, scholars could only speculate about Judaism during the Second Temple period. But this unforgiving place, a furnace of salt and stone, held within its caves the voices of a forgotten people. It is here, in this land of extremes, where geography meets prophecy, that the true story begins. In the spring of 1947, the world was teetering on the brink of immense change. The British Mandate in Palestine was drawing to a close. Tensions between Jewish and Arab populations were escalating, and the landscape of the Middle East stood poised for radical transformation. Amid this geopolitical chaos, a seemingly trivial event unfolded in the cliffs above the Dead Sea, one that would alter the course of history. 3 young Bedouin shepherds, Mohammed Dib, Juma Mohammed, and Khalil Musa, were tending their flocks near the desolate hills of Qumran, a remote and dusty region on the northwestern shores of the Dead Sea. The boys, like generations of Bedouin before them, were intimately familiar with the terrain. The goats they herded were agile and sure-footed, often straying into caves and crevices high along the limestone cliffs. According to most versions of the tale, it was a quest to retrieve a lost goat that led Mohammed Dib to the mouth of a small cave. Intrigued by its dark, narrow opening, he picked up a rock and hurled it inside. The echo that came back was not the dull thud of stone on earth, but the unmistakable crash of pottery breaking. The sound froze him. He had not just thrown a rock into a dark hole, he had shattered something. A vessel? A relic? Treasure? That night, under the desert stars, the boys speculated wildly. What could lie within that cave? The next morning, driven by curiosity, they returned to investigate. What they found was astonishing. The cave was small and cool, shielded from the relentless sun. Along its walls stood a series of tall clay jars, some sealed with wax-covered lids, others broken, their contents exposed. Inside the jars were bundles wrapped in linen. Carefully, the boys unwrapped one. Within it lay parchment, aged, brittle, and covered in strange writing. To untrained eyes, the scrolls were incomprehensible. The writing was ancient and faded, and the material itself looked like it might crumble at a touch. But even in their confusion, the boys knew these were not ordinary objects. They packed several scrolls into sacks and carried them down the cliffs. Not knowing their true value, they brought them to a local antiquities dealer in Bethlehem named Khalil Iskander Shaheen, also known as Kando. Kando, a Syrian Orthodox Christian and cobbler by trade, had a keen eye for ancient artifacts. When he examined the scrolls, he realized they were something extraordinary, but even he couldn't determine their full significance. Over the next few months, the scrolls changed hands multiple times. Some ended up with the Metropolitan of the Syrian Orthodox Church in Jerusalem, Athanasius Yeshua Samuel. Others were acquired by Eleazar Sukenik, an Israeli archaeologist and professor at the Hebrew University. It was Sukenik who first suggested that the texts might date back to the time of the Second Temple, more than 2,000 years old. This was an astonishing claim. If true, the scrolls would be older than any known biblical manuscripts by nearly a millennium. They would offer an unprecedented glimpse into the religious thought, daily life, and scriptural traditions of the Jewish people during a period that had, until then, been mostly understood through later texts and archaeology. As rumors of the discovery began to spread, interest in the scrolls intensified. Political tensions in the region made negotiations tricky. The partition plan for Palestine had just been passed by the United Nations, and open conflict loomed. Despite this, both Israeli and Jordanian authorities understood the cultural significance of the find and made efforts to secure and study the scrolls. In 1954, 4 of the original scrolls were put up for sale in a classified ad in the Wall Street Journal. The seller was Metropolitan Samuel, who had brought them to the United States in hopes of finding a buyer. The ad read, Biblical manuscripts dating back to at least 200 BC are for sale. This would be an ideal gift to an educational or religious institution. The buyer turned out to be Yigael Yadin, the son of Eleazar Sukenik, and a prominent Israeli archaeologist and military leader. Using an American intermediary, he secured the scrolls for the state of Israel for $250,000, a thousand-fold increase over what the Bedouins had received. The scrolls were returned to Jerusalem, where they were placed in the newly established shrine of the Book Museum, built specifically to house them. But the discovery of Cave 1 was just the beginning. Over the next decade, additional caves were located and excavated in the cliffs around Qumran. Some were found by archaeologists, others by Bedouin tribes who had caught wind of the scrolls' value. In total, 11 caves were eventually identified. Inside them lay more than 800 manuscripts in various states of preservation. Some were nearly complete scrolls, others were fragmented, thousands of tiny pieces, scattered and brittle. The scrolls were written in multiple languages: Hebrew, Aramaic, Greek, and even Latin. Some texts were familiar, copies of biblical books like Isaiah, Psalms, and Deuteronomy. Others were entirely new, commentaries, apocalyptic visions, rules for community life, and strange esoteric writings. The most intriguing aspect of the discovery wasn't just the age of the scrolls, but what they represented. They opened a window into the diversity of Jewish thought during the Second Temple period, an era crucial to the development of both Rabbinic Judaism and early Christianity. Before the Dead Sea Scrolls, the earliest complete Hebrew Bible dated to the 10th century AD. These new scrolls pushed that timeline back a full 1,000 years. Scholars were stunned to discover how closely some of the texts matched later versions, demonstrating a remarkable continuity of transmission. Yet other texts revealed significant variations, alternative versions, or additional details omitted from the canonical Bible. The discovery also presented logistical and academic challenges. Who should have access? Who should piece together the fragments? With the scrolls scattered across multiple countries, under different authorities, the early years of scroll research were slow, fragmented, and at times mired in controversy. And so, from a single stone thrown in boredom by a shepherd boy, emerged a cascade of discoveries that would revolutionize biblical scholarship, archaeology, and our understanding of ancient religion. But as more scrolls were uncovered, a new mystery emerged. Who had written them, and why had they been hidden so carefully, only to be found 2,000 years later? As the world adjusted to the aftermath of World War II and the Middle East plunged into political upheaval, the discovery of the scrolls continued to ripple outward, gaining momentum in scholarly circles and national debates alike. But while the international spotlight lingered on the geopolitical map, another type of map was quietly emerging, one of caves, manuscripts, and the ruins of a forgotten sect. Following the astonishing revelations from Cave 1, both archaeologists and Bedouin treasure hunters combed the surrounding cliffs with growing urgency. They were driven by a mix of scientific passion and the hope of reward. Between 1947 and 1956, 10 more caves were discovered in the limestone cliffs around Qumran, each adding new layers to the puzzle. In total, 11 caves would ultimately yield manuscript material. Some of the caves, like Cave 4, contained no complete scrolls at all, only fragments. But there were thousands of them, scrolls that had deteriorated or shattered over time, perhaps due to moisture or rodents, had broken down into tens of thousands of pieces. These fragments, some smaller than a fingernail, would require decades to sort, match, and reconstruct. It was like assembling a jigsaw puzzle made of parchment, with no image on the box. Among the scrolls were manuscripts from nearly every book of the Hebrew Bible except for Esther. Some books, like Deuteronomy and Psalms, appeared in multiple versions. A nearly complete scroll of the book of Isaiah was found in Cave 1, one of the most celebrated finds. This great Isaiah scroll was over 7 meters long and dated to roughly 125 BCE. Its contents match the modern Masoretic text with remarkable fidelity, confirming the long-term preservation of biblical scripture. But the scrolls didn't stop at the familiar. Alongside biblical texts were previously unknown psalms, apocalyptic treatises, and bizarre legal codes.
entire new genres of literature were discovered, sectarian rules that governed every aspect of community life, mystical visions of angelic hierarchies, and war manuals for a future cosmic conflict. One text, dubbed the Community Rule, offered a deep look into the internal governance of the group behind the scrolls. It outlined initiation rites, punishments, rules for communal meals, and theological doctrines. The tone was strict, even harsh, suggesting a society that viewed itself as the sole keeper of divine truth in a corrupted world. Then came the most unexpected artifact, the Copper Scroll. Unlike the rest, which were written on parchment or papyrus, this scroll was engraved on thin sheets of copper. Discovered in 1952 in Cave 3, it was so badly oxidized that scholars were forced to cut it into sections to read it. What they uncovered defied all expectations. The Copper Scroll wasn't a theological document, it was a list, a detailed inventory of 64 locations, each allegedly containing vast treasures of gold, silver, and ritual objects. The total quantity was staggering, over 65 tons of precious metal by some estimates. The list included specific measurements, landmark references, and sometimes even instructions for accessing the caches. Was it real? A coded message? A religious metaphor? Scholars remain divided. Despite numerous expeditions and treasure hunting efforts, none of the described treasures have been definitively found. Some believe the scroll lists temple treasures hidden during the Roman siege. Others suspect it was a symbolic text, or even a hoax. As the content of the scrolls became clearer, the urgency to preserve and study them intensified. But this wasn't easy. The political climate of the early 1950s was tense. The scrolls were physically scattered, some in Jordanian hands, others in Israeli collections, a few even in American universities. The Jordanian government, which controlled the West Bank and the Qumran site at the time, appointed the Palestine Archaeological Museum, now the Rockefeller Museum, in East Jerusalem as the central repository. An international team of scholars, most of them Christian and European, was given exclusive access to study and publish the scrolls. Unfortunately, this closed group moved slowly, very slowly. For decades, only a trickle of official translations emerged. Frustrated researchers outside the circle accused the team of academic gatekeeping. Conspiracy theories abounded. Was the Vatican involved? Were some scrolls too dangerous to release? By the 1970s and 80s, tensions boiled over. Scholars around the world began calling for open access. In a dramatic turn in 1991, two breakthroughs shattered the wall of secrecy. First, a computer scientist named Ben Zion Wacholder and his student used a concordance and photographic indexes to reconstruct the scroll's contents. Then, an anonymous source leaked a complete set of photographs to the Huntington Library in California, which promptly opened them to all scholars. The scrolls were finally freed. With advances in imaging and radiocarbon dating, scholars could now examine even the most degraded fragments. New software allowed virtual reconstruction. Multispectral imaging revealed faded ink. For the first time, the full scope of the Dead Sea Scrolls could be studied by a global community. In all, the scrolls represent the largest cache of ancient Jewish texts ever discovered. Their languages span Hebrew, Aramaic, Greek, and even a smattering of Latin. Their scripts range from formal Hebrew square script to
flowing cursive styles. They reflect a diversity of thought, law, mysticism, scripture, prophecy that challenges the notion of a monolithic Judaism during the Second Temple era. And yet, one question loomed above all others. Who were the people who wrote these scrolls? What kind of community would go to such lengths to preserve these documents only to hide them in caves, never to return? The search for their identity would lead scholars to one enigmatic group, mentioned only a few times in ancient texts, but described in eerily similar terms. The authors of the Dead Sea Scrolls have long intrigued scholars, theologians, and even conspiracy theorists. The contents of the scrolls, ranging from familiar biblical texts to strict community laws and cosmic battle blueprints, point to a group that was simultaneously embedded in Jewish tradition and set apart from it. But who were they? Early investigations led researchers to a little-known sect mentioned briefly by ancient authors, the Essenes. Philo of Alexandria, Pliny the Elder, and Flavius Josephus, three major historians of the early 1st century, Each described a group of Jewish separatists who lived in the desert, rejected material wealth, practiced communal living, and adhered to a life of strict ritual purity. Josephus, a former Jewish general turned Roman historian, provides the most detailed account. According to him, the Essenes were one of the three primary sects within Second Temple Judaism, alongside the Sadducees and the Pharisees. He claims they numbered around 4,000 men, lived mostly in desert communities, avoided personal possessions, and practiced daily immersion in water to maintain ritual cleanliness. Most Essenes refrained from marriage, abstained from sensual pleasures, and spent much of their time copying and studying scripture. Pliny the Elder places them specifically near the western shores of the Dead Sea, precisely where the scrolls were found. He describes them as an ancient, peaceful people who lived without money, shunned cities, and embraced austerity. Philo echoes these themes and praises their moral discipline and philosophical way of life. The archaeological evidence found at Qumran strongly supports this identification. Excavations uncovered communal dining halls, numerous ritual baths, mikvehs, a scriptorium believed to be used for copying texts, and an elaborate water collection system. The settlement lacks signs of personal wealth or individual homes. Everything about it suggests a collective lifestyle, centered around devotion and purity. The layout of the buildings aligns well with the rules described in the scrolls themselves. For example, the community rule document outlines a strict hierarchical structure with designated roles, punishments for disobedience, and a 2-year probationary period for new initiates. Meals were eaten in silence. Prayers and work were scheduled with military precision. Every aspect of life was regulated, down to how one should walk, speak, and even sleep. The tone of the texts paints a picture of a group that saw itself as a righteous remnant, a chosen few living in an impure world. They believed that mainstream Judaism, particularly the priesthood in Jerusalem, had become corrupt. They called themselves the Sons of Light and labeled outsiders, including their Jewish rivals, the Sons of Darkness. This binary worldview was not metaphorical. It was the core of their theology. According to the scrolls, history was a battleground in a divine war between good and evil, truth and deceit, light and darkness. Their entire existence was preparation for this coming conflict. But who exactly was leading them? Several scrolls mention a figure known as the Teacher of Righteousness. This mysterious leader is depicted as wise, persecuted, and divinely inspired. He clashes with a rival known as the Wicked Priest, who is believed to represent either a corrupt high priest in Jerusalem or an opposing faction within Judaism. Some texts hint that the teacher was betrayed and possibly killed. This figure has become the focal point of countless theories. Some scholars have suggested he could be a prototype or precursor to Jesus, John the Baptist, or even James, the brother of Jesus. Others argue he was a historical figure specific to the Qumran sect, an early Essene leader whose life became the subject of theological reflection. There's also the man of the lie, a deceitful figure condemned throughout the scrolls for spreading false teachings. His identity, like that of the wicked priest, is unknown, but he represents the ever-present danger of heresy and division in a group obsessed with purity and doctrinal correctness. While the idea that the Essenes wrote the scrolls is the most widely accepted theory, it's not without challengers. Some scholars argue that the texts reflect a broader spectrum of Jewish thought from the Second Temple period, and that the caves served as a repository or library for multiple communities. Others have suggested that Qumran was not a monastery, but a fortress, a manor estate, or even a pottery workshop. However, the overwhelming consensus remains in favor of the Essene theory, bolstered by both textual parallels and archaeological data. One compelling detail is the discovery of pottery shards at Qumran that match the jars found in the caves. Chemical analysis of the clay indicates they were made from the same local materials, likely at the same site. In addition, several of the scrolls found in the caves are thought to be drafts or copies in progress, suggesting the caves weren't just hiding places, but active components of a scribal operation. Moreover, radiocarbon dating and paleographic analysis place the scrolls' creation between the 3rd century BCE and the 1st century CE. This aligns perfectly with the historical window in which the Essenes are known to have flourished. Yet for all we do know, much remains a mystery. The Qumran community never named themselves outright in any of the scrolls, They left no official chronicle or genealogy. Their voices come to us only in rules, hymns, commentaries, and prophecies. They describe their worldview in stark terms, but not their individual stories. Were they zealots preparing for war? Ascetics awaiting divine intervention? Rebels cast out from society? Perhaps all of these. What we can say is that the people who wrote the Dead Sea Scrolls were part of a deeply religious, tightly organized, and apocalyptic community. They lived at the edge of civilization, looking inward for purity and upward for deliverance. They believed the world around them was corrupted and that they alone were preserving God's true will. To them, every scroll copied was an act of resistance. Every rule followed, a step closer to salvation. Every ritual bath, a rejection of a fallen world. And when the end came, perhaps during the first Jewish revolt against Rome, they hid their texts in caves, trusting that someday someone would find them. Someone did. Among the most debated aspects of the Dead Sea Scrolls is their potential connection to the origins of Christianity. The scrolls themselves never mention Jesus by name, nor do they directly reference any known New Testament figure. Yet, the thematic and theological parallels between the teachings of the Qumran sect and early Christianity are too significant to ignore. At the center of this discussion is John the Baptist. According to the Gospels, John lived in the wilderness, dressed in coarse garments, ate locusts and honey, and preached repentance and ritual immersion in water, baptism. These traits bear a striking resemblance to Essene practices. The sect emphasized purity, communal living, and preparation for the coming judgment. Like John, they operated on the margins of society and openly criticized the temple authorities in Jerusalem. Geographically, the proximity is tantalizing. The Qumran settlement lies just a few kilometers from the Jordan River, where John is said to have baptized followers. It's entirely plausible that John encountered Essenes during his life, or was influenced by their teachings. Some scholars even speculate that he may have lived among them for a time. The scroll's concept of the teacher of righteousness further fuels this discussion. This enigmatic figure is portrayed as a spiritual leader, persecuted by the wicked priest, and ultimately removed or killed. While we don't have enough evidence to equate him directly with Jesus or John, the archetype is hauntingly familiar. A divinely inspired teacher rejected by mainstream religion and embraced by a fringe community. One of the most direct parallels lies in language. The scrolls repeatedly refer to the Sons of Light, a name the sect used for themselves. In the Gospel of John, Jesus says, "While you have the light, believe in the light, so that you may become children of light." John 12:36. This similarity suggests a shared conceptual framework or mutual source of inspiration. Both communities also anticipated an apocalyptic showdown. The Essenes believed in a final battle between the Sons of Light and the Sons of Darkness, where God would ultimately intervene to establish divine justice. Early Christians, particularly the followers of Jesus during his lifetime, also anticipated an imminent transformation of the world, one in which the righteous would triumph, and God's kingdom would be established. Where they diverge, however, is critical. The Essenes practiced a form of elitist exclusivity. Their rules disqualified the blind, deaf, lame, and others considered impure from full participation. They viewed the world through a rigid dualism. You were either in or out, pure or impure, light or dark. Jesus, by contrast, openly welcomed those same people, the poor, the sick, the marginalized. He dined with tax collectors, healed the blind, and embraced lepers. His teachings often criticized rigid legalism and called for inner transformation over external observance. There is also the issue of accessibility. The Qumran sect was secretive and insular. Their rituals and teachings were closely guarded, shared only with initiates. Early Christianity, especially as spread by Paul, was radically inclusive. It opened its doors to Gentiles, to women, to slaves. The message of salvation was universal, not confined to a chosen few. Still, the similarities are profound. The shared language, apocalyptic worldview, emphasis on purity, and use of communal meals suggest that both groups were products of the same turbulent era. The Second Temple period was marked by foreign occupation, religious corruption, and cultural upheaval. It's no surprise that multiple radical movements arose in response. One particularly compelling scroll is the Thanksgiving hymns, or Hodayot. These are deeply personal poems, filled with confessions, pleas for deliverance, and expressions of divine love. In tone and theme, they resemble the Psalms and echo many of the spiritual struggles found in early Christian writings. Another document, the Rule of the Congregation, outlines the traits of a coming messianic figure. He is described as wise, righteous, and anointed by God. However, this Messiah is primarily a political and priestly leader, not necessarily a suffering servant or divine son. Still, the concept of a messianic redeemer was clearly present and evolving. There are also texts that refer to multiple messiahs, one of Aaron, priestly, and one of Israel, kingly. This dual expectation may shed light on early Christian confusion and debate about the nature of Jesus. Was he a priest, a prophet, a king, or all three? Some fringe theories go further. In the 1990s, books like The Dead Sea Scrolls Deception and Jesus the Man argued that Jesus may have been a member of the Qumran community or directly influenced by it. These claims are largely rejected by mainstream scholars, but reflect the enduring allure of a hidden connection. What is widely accepted, however, is that the Dead Sea Scrolls provide a vital backdrop to the birth of Christianity. They offer an unparalleled glimpse into the religious ideas swirling in Judea during the final centuries before the Common Era. They reveal a world of sects, disputes, prophecies, and longings, a world in which a figure like Jesus could emerge and spark a revolution. In many ways, the Essenes and early Christians were asking the same questions. How do we live in a corrupt world? What does God require of us? When will justice come? The answers they gave were different, but their cries came from the same desert. One of the most haunting documents among the Dead Sea Scrolls is the so-called War Scroll, or as it is formally known, the War of the Sons of Light against the Sons of Darkness. This text is a chilling, meticulously organized military manual that outlines the expected final battle between the forces of good and evil. It reads not like a metaphorical vision, but a literal call to arms, a blueprint for holy war. The War Scroll describes a series of confrontations that will unfold over 40 years. 7 battles will be fought between the Sons of Light and the Sons of Darkness, the latter including not only foreign enemies like the Kittim, usually identified as the Romans, but also wayward Israelites, Jews whom the sect deemed corrupted by false worship and moral laxity. The Sons of Light, presumably the Qumran sect and their allies, are aided by angelic hosts, while the enemy is supported by demonic spirits. This isn't symbolic allegory, it's a battle plan. The scroll gives detailed instructions on military formations, the roles of priests in battle, trumpet signals, and even the order in which blessings should be spoken. There are precise allocations of soldiers, priests, trumpeters, and banners for each division. The army's purity is emphasized. Warriors must be righteous, and priests are required to lead prayers and sacrifices before combat. It's part religious ceremony, part military strategy. One remarkable feature of the scroll is its emphasis on divine timing. Victory is not assured by military might, but by God's intervention. The battle swings back and forth, 3 victories for the enemy, followed by 4 decisive wins for the Sons of Light, culminating in the final triumph of divine justice. This symmetrical sequence underscores the group's apocalyptic worldview. History is a divinely scripted drama, with evil allowed to thrive only temporarily. The War Scroll isn't unique in its martial fervor. Several other texts among the Dead Sea Scrolls speak of coming judgment, cosmic upheaval, and divine vengeance. This was a community deeply immersed in apocalyptic expectation. They believed they were living in the end times, the final days of a corrupt world order. Their isolation, strict purity rules, and intense theological focus all reflect a people preparing, not just spiritually, but physically, for the culmination of history. This outlook wasn't isolated to the Qumran sect. Apocalypticism was widespread in Second Temple Judaism, a reaction to centuries of oppression, foreign domination, and disillusionment with temple leadership. But the Qumran texts go further than most. They blend prophecy with policy, mysticism with militancy. Interestingly, the War Scroll aligns the Sons of Light with angelic forces under the command of the Archangel Michael. This figure appears in the Hebrew Bible's Book of Daniel as a protector of Israel and features prominently in early Christian and apocalyptic literature. The scroll describes a final showdown in which Michael will strike down the armies of darkness, cleansing the world of impurity and sin. This is not merely a hope for personal salvation. It is the expectation of global transformation. of history itself being judged and remade. The tone of the War Scroll also reveals something else. Paranoia. The Sons of Light see enemies everywhere. Even within Israel, there are traitors, false priests, and heretical factions. The group's sense of identity is forged not just through faith, but opposition. They survive by being separate, by staying pure in a world of filth, by preparing for a war that would purge the earth of corruption. One of the most disturbing elements of the scroll is its unflinching embrace of violence. There are no instructions for mercy, no discussions of reconciliation. The sons of darkness are to be destroyed, utterly and completely. Even women and children are not spared in some interpretations. It is a document forged in suffering, but also in rage. And yet, the war never came, at least not as they imagined. When the Romans crushed the first Jewish revolt between 66 and 73 CE, they destroyed Jerusalem, razed the temple, and slaughtered tens of thousands. For the Essenes, this may have seemed like the beginning of the end. Yet no angelic armies appeared. No divine intervention took place. The temple fell, but so did the apocalyptic hope. Some scholars believe the Qumran sect may have attempted to carry out part of the War Scroll's vision. Evidence suggests that the community was attacked and destroyed around 68 CE, possibly by Roman forces advancing toward Jerusalem. Arrowheads, ashes, and signs of abrupt abandonment support this theory. Whether the sect resisted or fled is unknown. What is clear is that they never returned. Fragments of the War Scroll were found in multiple caves, suggesting it was a widely copied and important text. Its survival speaks to the central role it played in the sect's theology. It also illustrates a broader human truth. In times of fear and uncertainty, people often turn to visions of divine justice, even vengeance, to make sense of suffering. The War Scroll's legacy continues to resonate. It has inspired modern novels, films, and apocalyptic theorists. Some see in it echoes of the Book of Revelation. Others read it as a cautionary tale about religious extremism. Either way, the War Scroll is a window into a lost world, a world of radical faith, looming doom, and the hope that even in the darkest hour, light would prevail. And just as the Qumran sect believed they were on the brink of divine transformation, so too did early Christians. Both awaited the kingdom of God. Both prepared for the end. But where one looked inward and armed for war, the other looked outward and preached peace. The story of the War Scroll is not just about a manuscript. It's about a mindset, a moment, a movement that believed history had a final chapter, and they were writing it. While the Dead Sea Scrolls were quietly rewriting the story of biblical history, another mystery lay right next to the caves. An ancient ruin, partially buried in the sand, long misidentified by early explorers. This was the archaeological site of Qumran, and its secrets were as vital to the scroll's story as the manuscripts themselves. Shortly after the scrolls were discovered, archaeologists began focusing their attention on the crumbling remains of buildings perched above the cliffs. The first to seriously excavate the site was Roland de Vaux, a French Dominican priest and archaeologist, working under the auspices of the École biblique et archéologique française in Jerusalem. Starting in 1951 and continuing through several seasons until 1956, de Vaux led a team of Catholic scholars through a careful excavation of the ruins. At first, the ruins seemed modest, just a cluster of stone foundations, shattered pottery, and rubble-strewn corridors. Some scholars initially thought it was a Roman military outpost or perhaps a wealthy estate. But as more of the site was uncovered, a different picture emerged. This was no ordinary settlement. There were no luxury goods, no evidence of elite domestic life. Instead, the architecture suggested a communal way of life centered around ritual, discipline, and study. The layout of Qumran is strikingly symmetrical and highly organized. Central to the complex is a long assembly hall, likely used for communal meals or gatherings. Adjacent to it is a room now referred to as the scriptorium, the place believed to have been used for writing and copying scrolls. In this room, archaeologists found inkwells, desks, benches, and even traces of dried ink. It is the only known scriptorium from Second Temple Judaism ever discovered. De Vaux concluded that Qumran had been occupied by a sectarian Jewish group, most likely the Essenes, who lived here between the 2nd century BCE and 68 CE, when the site was likely destroyed by the Romans. Pottery shards found at the site
matched those found in the scroll caves, confirming a direct connection. A massive quantity of broken pottery, including the unique cylindrical jars used to store the scrolls, littered the site. But Qumran wasn't just a scribal community, it was a place of spiritual preparation. The site contains an unusually high number of ritual baths, or mikvehs, more than has been found at almost any other known site from the period. These stone-lined pools were used for immersion and purification. The frequency and variety of these baths suggest that ritual purity was central to the community's daily life. Water management was critical in this arid desert landscape. The Qumran sect engineered an intricate aqueduct system, channeling seasonal floodwaters from nearby wadis into large cisterns and reservoirs. This ensured a year-round water supply not only for drinking and cooking, but for the many ritual immersions the community required. Even their water collection reflected a deeper spiritual goal: separation from the impurity of the outside world. Nearby, archaeologists also uncovered a large cemetery. Over 1,100 graves stretch out in neat, linear rows. Most of the burials are male, further supporting the theory that Qumran was a celibate, male-only community, like those described in ancient texts about the Essenes. However, later excavations found several female and child skeletons as well, raising the possibility that the community's demographics were more complex, or that the site had been used for multiple purposes over time. More intriguing still was the discovery of coins, over 500 of them, dating from the Seleucid and Hasmonean periods through to the early Roman era. These coins were found in large storage jars, perhaps representing the pooled wealth of the sect, or tithes donated by members. Their presence hints at an economy, even a treasury, operated under strict communal rules. Beyond the main compound, scholars have identified several additional caves and shelters. Some may have housed members of the community during temporary isolation or quarantine. Others might have served as private cells for ascetic practice or scholarly work. The full extent of Qumran's layout is still being explored. The connection between the scroll caves and the Qumran site was confirmed in 1996 when archaeologists discovered an ancient path linking Cave 4, the richest in scroll fragments, directly to the settlement. Along this route, they found sandals, nail fragments, and pottery sherds dating to the Second Temple period, left behind by those who had likely carried the scrolls to their final resting places. One of the most debated aspects of Qumran is whether it was inhabited full-time or used seasonally, perhaps as a retreat for study and ritual. The evidence suggests a permanent settlement, albeit austere and deliberately separated from the urban centers of Jewish life. Roland DeVoe and his team interpreted the site through their own monastic lens. As Catholic clergy, they saw in Qumran a reflection of their own experience: celibate, scholarly, ascetic. This perspective shaped much of the early scholarship and has since been re-examined by newer generations of archaeologists. While many conclusions hold up, scholars today are more cautious about imposing Christian monastic frameworks on Jewish sectarian groups. Lawrence Schiffman and other scholars have pushed for a more nuanced view of Qumran. Rather than a proto-Christian monastery, it may have been a highly legalistic Jewish community obsessed with halakhic, Jewish legal precision, and apocalyptic hope. Their lives were governed by a strict interpretation of Torah, not unlike the Pharisees, but focused entirely on separation
and preparation. Other fringe theories suggest Qumran may have been a fortress, an administrative center, or even a pottery manufacturing site. However, the overwhelming combination of archaeological and textual evidence supports the view of a religious communal settlement focused on scribal production and ritual purity. And in many ways, the ruins of Qumran speak louder than any scroll. They whisper of discipline and devotion, of meals taken in silence, of water carried bucket by bucket from hand-carved cisterns, of prayers spoken in stone chambers, of a people who believed they were the last faithful remnant in a world about to end. These stones and baths and broken pots form the backdrop to the Dead Sea Scrolls, a library in exile, preserved not just in parchment, but in walls, rituals, and dust. As remarkable as the scrolls and the Qumran site are, the story of the Dead Sea Scrolls is not simply one of archaeological triumph. It is also a story of secrecy, exclusion, and suspicion. For decades after their discovery, the scrolls were locked behind scholarly gates, access limited to an elite few. What should have been a global intellectual treasure was instead cloaked in mystery, sparking decades of controversy and conspiracy theories. When the scrolls were first discovered and recovered, They were placed under the stewardship of the Palestine Archaeological Museum, later renamed the Rockefeller Museum in East Jerusalem. In the early 1950s, Jordan controlled the region, and Jordanian authorities assembled a small, exclusive team of scholars to handle the scrolls. This team, known informally as the Scrollery, was dominated by Western European Christians, particularly Catholic scholars from the École Biblique in Jerusalem. This small group was tasked with the immense responsibility of piecing together and publishing thousands of ancient fragments, many of them badly damaged, but their progress was excruciatingly slow. Over the course of several decades, only a small portion of the scrolls were published, and access to the full archive was denied to outside researchers. Requests for photographs, fragments, or even study rights were routinely rejected. The secrecy led to mounting frustration. Scholars around the world demanded open access. Their calls grew louder in the 1970s and 1980s, but were largely ignored. Critics began to question what was being hidden and why. Rumors swirled that some scrolls contained references to early Christianity, Jesus, or even alternate gospel accounts. Others speculated that the Vatican itself was involved in suppressing documents that might challenge Orthodox doctrine. The most famous theory was that the scrolls contained a reference to a crucified figure, possibly the leader of the Qumran sect, sparking a frenzy of speculation. Was this a veiled reference to Jesus? If so, why would Catholic scholars not rush to publish it? Was it damaging, heretical, revolutionary? The lack of transparency gave these theories oxygen. In an age before digital archives and open scholarship, the control exerted by the Scrollery was seen as not just academic negligence, but an intentional cover-up. That all changed in the early 1990s. In 1991, two major events broke the scrolls wide open. First, a professor at Hebrew Union College, Ben Zion Wacholder, and his student, Martin Abegg, used a concordance of the scrolls to reconstruct many of the unpublished texts. They published their findings, shocking the academic world and proving that the information was, in fact, decipherable with the right tools. Shortly thereafter, the Huntington Library in California announced that it possessed a complete set of photographs of the scrolls. Photographs that had been quietly given to the library by a scholar years earlier. The library made the images public. Suddenly, the world had access. The gates had burst open. With the scrolls finally in public view, a wave of scholarship followed. New technologies like infrared imaging and multispectral analysis allowed researchers to recover ink invisible to the naked eye. Advanced computer algorithms were applied to fragment reconstruction. Radiocarbon dating refined the chronological framework. Within a few years, the field exploded, but the damage had been done. The decades of silence had already inspired dozens of books, documentaries, and films feeding the conspiracy machine. From tales of Vatican suppression to connections with secret societies and underground Christian sects, the myth of the hidden scrolls had already taken hold in the public imagination. In fairness, the original scholars were not part of some elaborate conspiracy. They were working in a chaotic post-war environment with limited resources and on one of the most complex archaeological puzzles in history. But their failure to recognize the importance of transparency left a lasting scar on the academic legacy of the scrolls. Meanwhile, the real revelations, those grounded in textual analysis, were just as fascinating as the rumors. The scrolls revealed the full diversity of Judaism during the Second Temple period. They showed that sacred texts were not fixed, but fluid, edited, redacted, and interpreted in varying ways. They demonstrated that messianic expectations were widespread, but not uniform. Some texts even challenged the traditional biblical canon. The Book of Enoch, for instance, long excluded from Jewish and most Christian Bibles, was found among the scrolls in multiple copies. Other apocryphal texts, once dismissed as marginal or heretical, were shown to have been valued by real communities of believers. The scrolls also clarified the legal debates raging at the time. One document, the Damascus document, preserved in both Qumran and the Cairo Geniza, lays out detailed rules for community life, ritual practice, and calendar observance. It became clear that the Qumran sect followed a different religious calendar than the mainstream Jerusalem temple. They used a 364-day solar calendar, while the temple used a lunar one. This calendrical difference was more than academic, it was theological, marking a total break from temple authority. Such texts challenge the notion of religious unity in ancient Judaism and expose the deep rifts within the Jewish world of the 1st century BCE and CE. The Sadducees, Pharisees, Essenes, Zealots each had its own vision of truth, holiness, and the path to salvation. And within this fractious landscape, the Qumran community stood apart, hidden in the wilderness, preparing for a war they believed would end history. The scrolls they left behind were not hidden to deceive, but to preserve. They buried their texts not to deny the world access, but to protect them from destruction. That protection worked, whether by providence, salt, or stone, for 2,000 years. And when they finally emerged into the light, they forced scholars, theologians, and believers alike to confront a deeper truth: that the sacred story of humanity's relationship with the divine was far more complex, diverse, and contested than anyone had dared imagine. As the dust settled around the controversies of access and suppression, another mystery emerged. One buried not in politics, but in the scrolls themselves. While many documents found in the caves were identifiable, copies of biblical texts, communal rules, hymns, others defied easy classification. They were strange, cryptic, and in some cases, deeply tantalizing. The copper scroll, discovered in Cave 3, was unlike anything else found in Qumran. It was not parchment or leather, but 2 rolls of thin copper, brittle with oxidation and difficult to unroll. When it was finally cut into strips and read, it wasn't a prayer or prophecy. It was a list, a treasure map. 64 locations were described in great detail, each supposedly containing vast quantities of gold, silver, and ceremonial objects. Some entries even included instructions for how to find the hidden hoards, using measurements, landmarks, and coded language. Estimates of the treasure's value run into the billions of dollars, but none of the locations listed have ever yielded anything. Some scholars believe the copper scroll may be a record of real temple treasures hidden away before the Roman siege of Jerusalem. Others think it is allegorical, a spiritual map rather than a physical one. A few even suggest it could have been a forgery, planted to inspire hope or mislead enemies. Regardless of its origin, the copper scroll stoked the imagination of generations. Expeditions were launched, books were written. Some modern treasure hunters still search the hills of Judea, convinced the hoards are real. Equally puzzling are the so-called pesharim, commentaries on books of the Hebrew Bible, particularly the prophetic writings. These texts reinterpret biblical passages to refer to events contemporary with the Qumran community. The Habakkuk Pesher, for example, speaks of a teacher of righteousness, a wicked priest, and a man of the lie. Who were these people? The teacher is portrayed as a divinely inspired interpreter of Scripture, someone persecuted by corrupt religious authorities. The wicked priest is sometimes thought to be a Hasmonean ruler, possibly Jonathan or Alexander Jannaeus, figures known for consolidating religious and political power. The man of the lie represents internal division, a rival leader or apostate who misled the faithful. The veiled nature of these identities continues to invite speculation. Were they allegorical or historical figures? Could they correspond to known individuals from Jewish or early Christian history? Some fringe theories equate the teacher with Jesus, the wicked priest with Paul, or the man of the lie with early Christian heresies. Mainstream scholarship is more cautious, favoring historical figures from within Judaism, but the mystery persists. Then there's the Temple Scroll, a massive, nearly complete manuscript discovered in Cave 11. It outlines a grand vision for a new temple, with architectural details, ritual laws, and sacrificial regulations far more elaborate than anything in the Hebrew Bible. The temple it describes was never built, but the scroll shows that the Qumran sect had a fully developed, alternative vision of religious life, one that rejected the existing temple in Jerusalem and sought to replace it with their own blueprint for divine worship. This text alone demonstrates the depth of sectarian ambition. The people of Qumran were not just waiting for the end of the world, they were planning for its rebirth. Even more intriguing are the astronomical and calendrical texts, which reveal a deep preoccupation with time. The Qumran sect followed a 364-day solar calendar, in contrast to the 354-day lunar calendar used in Jerusalem. This divergence was not minor. It shaped the entire liturgical year, dictating when festivals were observed and sacrifices performed. The sect believed the lunar calendar was corrupted and that their system represented God's true order. This obsession with time speaks to a broader worldview, one in which cosmic order, ritual precision, and divine timing were paramount. To the people of Qumran, the world had fallen into chaos precisely because the temple and its priests had abandoned the correct calendar. Restoring the true schedule was not just pedantic, it was salvific. Another scroll, the Songs of the Sabbath Sacrifice, presents a liturgy for angelic worship. Written in exalted, mystical language, it describes heavenly beings singing praise in celestial temples. The text lacks any clear sectarian identity and may reflect a shared mystical tradition across different Jewish groups. Its tone is ecstatic, almost trance-like, a rare glimpse into the inner spiritual life of the era. Some of the most enigmatic fragments come from Cave 4, which contained the largest collection of scroll material but in the poorest condition. Many texts were found in tiny pieces, jumbled together, difficult to date or translate. For decades, this cave was under the tightest scholarly control, and its slow publication only added to the air of secrecy. In the late 1960s and 70s, rumors emerged that one of the Cave 4 texts contained a reference to a crucifixion. The text reportedly described the punishment of a leader of the community, nailed to wood, exposed, and left to die. Though this translation was later deemed inaccurate, the mere possibility sent shockwaves through the academic and religious worlds. Finally, there is the question of why the scrolls were hidden. Most scholars believe the Qumran community buried their texts during the First Jewish Revolt against Rome, 66 to 73 CE. As Roman legions swept through the land, sacking cities and destroying the temple, the community knew they were next. In a final act of preservation, they stored their most precious writings in the nearby caves, hoping to return. But they never did. Qumran was destroyed, likely burned, its members either killed or scattered. The scrolls remained undisturbed, sealed by time, geology, and silence, until a shepherd threw a rock. The Dead Sea Scrolls are not merely relics of the past. Their discovery and the vast universe they revealed continues to shape the way we understand scripture, history, religion, and ourselves. In many ways, they act as a time capsule, frozen for over 2,000 years and opened at a moment in history when humanity had the tools and the curiosity to decipher them. The community that wrote them is gone. The temple they feared and revered is long destroyed. The world they sought to purify has changed beyond recognition. Yet their scrolls endure, silent witnesses to a forgotten chapter in spiritual history. When Rome crushed the Jewish revolt in 70 CE and razed Jerusalem, many sects vanished. The Sadducees, whose authority depended on the temple, faded into oblivion. The Zealots were killed or scattered. The Essenes, if they were indeed the authors of the scrolls, disappeared into the sands of time, perhaps destroyed at Qumran or absorbed into other movements. But not all was lost. The Pharisees, with their emphasis on oral law and decentralized worship, survived. Over time, their teachings evolved into what we know today as Rabbinic Judaism. Their flexibility allowed Judaism to endure without the temple, preserving faith through study, synagogue, and tradition. Christianity, on the other hand, followed a different path. Starting as a Jewish sect, it grew rapidly after the destruction of the temple. It spread across the Roman Empire and beyond, adapting itself to new cultures and societies. Within a few centuries, it became the dominant religion of the West. In time, the teachings of Jesus, Paul, and the early church fathers would influence billions, and the Dead Sea Scrolls, they outlasted them all. They remain one of the greatest archaeological discoveries in human history, not because they confirm any one religion, but because they reveal the incredible diversity of belief and the complexity of spiritual life in the ancient world. Before the scrolls were found, scholars relied primarily on later sources to reconstruct the Judaism of the Second Temple period. The discovery of these ancient texts shattered the illusion of uniformity. It revealed a world of competing sects, apocalyptic visions, ritual obsessions, and theological experimentation. It which showed that what we call Judaism and Christianity were once part of a broader, messier spectrum of faith. The scrolls also sparked renewed interest in forgotten texts. Books once considered apocryphal, like Enoch, Jubilees, and Tobit, gained new scholarly attention. Entire fields of study, including Second Temple Judaism and the origins of Christian thought, were reinvigorated. And religious communities, Jewish and Christian alike, were compelled to reconsider the roots of their traditions. The scrolls challenge us to see the Bible not as a monolith, but as a living, evolving document, shaped by centuries of transmission, interpretation, and debate. They remind us that Scripture was once a dynamic conversation, not a closed canon. In museums around the world, fragments of the scrolls are displayed behind glass, faded, fragile, but potent. Scholars continue to pore over them, aided now by digital imaging, artificial intelligence, and machine learning. New insights emerge each year. New translations, new interpretations, new connections. Their preservation, too, is a testament to human ingenuity. Controlled environments, ultraviolet filters, and advanced conservation techniques keep the scrolls from decaying. Digitization projects have made them accessible to anyone with an internet connection. No longer locked away in stone caves or elite libraries, the scrolls have become global. Their influence has extended far beyond academia. They've inspired novels, films, documentaries, and art. They've sparked theological debates, political intrigue, and interfaith dialogue. They've captured the imagination of believers and skeptics alike. For some, they are proof of the Bible's ancient roots. For others, they are evidence of religious diversity and the human impulse toward transcendence. For all, they are a reminder of the enduring power of the written word. But perhaps their greatest legacy is this: they remind us that history is not settled, that buried in the earth, in forgotten caves or dusty archives, are stories waiting to be found. That truth, like the scrolls themselves, can be fragile, but also resilient. In the end, the Dead Sea Scrolls are more than manuscripts. They are messages in bottles, sent across millennia by a community convinced their words mattered. They were right.